Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you might be joining. First and foremost, thank you. Lots of great sessions today, and you chose to spend some time with me. I really do appreciate it, and will do my best to make it worth your while. My name is Ruben Singh. I'm with 1/10 Consulting, and this workshop is Diversity and Inclusion for System Implementers. Let's do our part. I encourage you to check out and contribute to the collaborative notes. And also, please feel free to post your questions, thoughts, agrees, disagrees in the comments. I won't be able to directly respond to them in the chat, but we'll carve out some time at the end to look through and respond to what I can. I'm just going to do a quick check here to make sure we are all good. All right, technology-wise, I think we are all set. Okay. I will jump back to my slides. All right. A little bit about us. We are a boutique consulting practice that works exclusively with nonprofits, focusing on everything from strategy to CRM implementation to change management. As for me personally, outside of my professional work, I've always been interested in the areas of race and equity. I have the privilege to guest teach at local high schools on this particular topic and facilitate conversations on this with various committees I'm engaged with in the local school system. And while I feel like my whole life has been a case study on diversity and inclusion, I did take on a quarantine project to finally get my certification, which, if for nothing else, has helped me apply models and frameworks to many of the experiences I've had over the years. So for the next 25 minutes or so, I'd like to bring you a combination of those learnings, those experiences for discussion that can hopefully help move our sector forward. Before we get into where we are going as a sector, I'd like to get your opinions on where you think we are currently. And so I'm going to humbly request for those of you interested in joining me, it's not mandatory, but I did set up a poll everywhere. And so what you could do is, if you'd like to participate on your computer or another device, go to pollev.com/RubenSingh599. You can copy and paste it from the collaboration notes if you have access to those. And I have a few questions here that I'm going to ask. So give me a second and let me just make sure that I'm seeing everything. All right, infinite slides for sure. Okay, just giving everybody a minute to get into the poll everywhere. And so let's take a look at some of the questions that we have. It should be activated. And I will go in present mode. And so the first question, and we'll just kind of go through these together if that's okay. My first question is quite simple. Let me get over to it. There we go. Is there a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion problem in the nonprofit sector? Okay. Yeah, so we'll give you all a second here just to answer some of these questions. And then we'll talk through it a little bit. So again, feel free to, it's up at the top here, how to access that poll, pollev.com/RubenSingh599, and you could enter your comments. And okay, so I think what I'm seeing is a consensus, so I won't spend any more time on this particular slide, but I am curious from everyone's perspective here, where do you feel that we are in terms of the biggest struggle amongst these three categories? And I will give you, some folks, there's different definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I will give you mine, or at least one that I like, an example that I like. There, as I mentioned, there's a lot of definitions to DEI. So to simplify, I'll use the common example of the work party planning committee that you've often heard, and I'll isolate it to just race for a second. So diversity is making sure people of different races show up to the party. Inclusion is ensuring people of different races are on the planning committee of the party. And equity is asking why people of different races were not invited before, trying to understand what historical disadvantages may have occurred because of this, and then finding ways to shift power to create a more fair system moving forward. So given that, rough definition, where does the nonprofit sector struggle the most? And so I'm seeing, by a majority here, we're thinking inclusion. with diversity as a second and equity as a third. Interesting thoughts. I wasn't expecting this. I was expecting a little bit more on the equity side. So that's good to see. Let's go through this a little bit more. I do want to ask another question. So what are some of the key drivers to the inequities in the nonprofit sector? And you all have already jumped on this. This is great. Salaries low, gender in leadership. People mean well, but don't know how to implement. Very good. Very good. I like it. What else? What else? What are some other key drivers to the inequities that we have in the nonprofit sector today? Feel free to just drop your comments in. And I'll see if I can. Lack of understanding of communities. We're going to touch on that. The structures in place. Yes. Lack of capacity, resources. Okay. All right. Great answers. Great answers. And I will export these answers and I will share them in the collaborative notes afterwards in case y'all would like to take a look at it. This is fantastic. All the things I was hoping we would touch on. Year service, no action. Something we're definitely going to talk about. Yes, great. All right, you're stealing my thunder here. I'm going to keep moving before we cover all my slides in this one. So we'll keep moving. I think I have one more question here for now, and then we'll come back. Actually, two questions. Does the nonprofit technology sector, so the technology sector in particular here, the vendors, the system implementers, the consultants, do we, and I'm putting myself in that category, contribute to the inequities in our sector? Okay, vast majority is yes. And so I think, so hopefully we'll have some good ideas on how to solve this problem by the end of this presentation. Excellent. Okay. And I think one more for now. Oh, no, we'll come back to the takeaway slide later. So this is great. Thank you so much for participating in that. I'm going to jump back to my slides here. So good idea to see where exactly we are. So do we have a DEI problem in the nonprofit sector? I'll tell you my answer. Yes. Looking at the data of CEP, when they released a survey in 2019, were of the 15,000 respondents who were executive directors of nonprofits, 75% identified as white. And the next race represented drops down to 9%. Indiana University released a diversity study that revealed of the 315 of the largest nonprofits in the U.S., 87% of the organizations have white executive directors. So you might say, well, that's just EDs. That's not the whole ecosystem. What about the foundations? Well, Bridgespan and the New York Times said 92% of foundation leaders and 83% of their full-time staff are white. And then you might say, well, what about boards? You know, they're the ones who are really overseeing and setting the strategy for nonprofits. Turns out nonprofit boards are at 78.6% white. So for me personally, I don't need to look at statistics. I just need to go to conferences and watch webinars. And with the exception of NTC, there is a slim to none chance that someone who looks like me would ever be looked at as an expert or a thought leader in this space. To the point where conferences like this hold special racial affinity spaces where people of color can collectively exhale and unpack our experiences with one another, which is something I'm personally very grateful for. So you might be thinking, so what? You know, why does any of this matter? Good people are, working hard in this sector, trying to make the world a better place. Why do you, Ruben, have to make this a racial issue? Well, I'll tell you why. These inequities cause problems. In its mildest form, it enables workplace discrimination. And in its more dangerous form, some of the things that Professor Benjamin spoke to this morning, it creates programs designed by people who do not understand the culture and intricacies of the communities that they aim to serve. It can actually create problems bigger than the ones the nonprofit intended to solve. And in cases like, in history with so-called good intentions, like the war on poverty or the war on drugs, the result is actually criminalizing communities. And in its worst form, we have the nonprofit industrial complex, again referred to this morning, where nonprofits, local governments, and businesses are working together to hoard power, resources, and influence, which in the end hurt marginalized communities the most. And this is an entirely different talk for another day. But the question I have for you is, do system implementers play a role in this? Do we play a role in inequities? And I saw by and large the answer that you gave me was yes. I will be honest with you, though, many of my colleagues in this space say, not really. We're not the nonprofits. We are not the foundations. We are not the philanthropists. We are not the ones who are responsible for this mess. We're just here slinging tech. We're part of the solution, right? Tech for good. And while that might seem like the case, now personally that I have been more deliberate and opening my eyes and trying to look at things through an equity lens, I am starting to see that perhaps I am part of the problem. Case in point, I'll give you an example. I'm working with an organization a few months back for a cause that has suffered from a historical lack of diversity. And after last summer, they put on their website, hey, we care about equality, diversity, representation matters. It's one of our key principles. They sent their donors a serious email, et cetera, et cetera. But in the midst of our project, as we started talking about their automated volunteer selection process that I was designing for them, the algorithm was solely based on years of experience, education level, advanced skill sets, that kind of thing. So I asked the question, I said, you said a lot about diversifying your volunteers, but this algorithm that you have here is going to get you, it's not going to get you there. This is going to continue to give you what you're getting. So why don't you consider these alternatives instead? And when they essentially replied to me, well, Ruben, you're our tech consultant. Thanks for your opinion on this, but this is the way that we're going to go. I said, okay, well, you're going to have to find yourself another tech consultant. And after 20 years in this industry, that was the first time I had ever done that. And I started to wonder, how many opportunities did I miss over the years to do the right thing? Now that was an extreme example, and I know that running my own practice gives me the privilege to walk away from a customer if I feel so inclined. But let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that you and I can challenge some of the inequities that we see in the ecosystem. And I'm going to reference some ideas from the N10 Tech Equity Guide, which I had the opportunity to contribute to. If you have not read it, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's an excellent guideline on how we individually and collectively can move our sector forward in terms of equity. I did post the link to this in the collaborative notes. And shouts out to the many co-contributors to that guide, many of whom will be in your sessions today, I'm sure. But I'll share with you 5 tangible things as a system implementer or a technology partner that you can do. First and foremost, assemble the right team. Your implementation team that you bring forth to the client should represent diversity in all its forms, from race, gender, ethnicity, age, ability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic, education level, you name it. The more diverse your team is, the more you will uncover perspectives you've never thought of. And the more fruitful the engagement is going to be for everyone involved. Just a couple weeks ago, I was working with a national civil rights organization designing their bias incident / hate crime tracker. And I thought to myself as I was in the work how appropriate it was for someone like me who has not only designed such systems before, but also as someone who has been on the other side of that system filling out such a form. The insight that I could give them from what I wanted to share to what felt comfortable disclosing, what did not feel comfortable disclosing, was unlike anything that anyone else could provide. Now, of course, you may not have someone on your team to speak to every possible cause, but the more diverse your team is, the more likely you will be able to design solutions with your clients and beneficiaries in mind. So this is definitely something to consider. A perfect example of this is the complexity that we're seeing right now with the online forms to register for a COVID shot. At least in my community, it was surely not designed for people of my parents' age, and it's surely wasn't designed for people from immigrant communities at all. And then we start to wonder, why is it that there is inequities in who is getting vaccinated? So no surprise there. And from my experience, having facilitated CRM selection processes, vendor selection processes, even if you don't value diversity as an organization, your particular team, your client will. I've seen clients turn down vendors because they brought a team of all men to a system demo, and they said, it was over from the very beginning. They clearly didn't get us as an organization or understand what we were about, if that's what they were going to do. The second, so assembling the right team is the first thing. The second is requesting the right team. As I start talking to clients and we start kicking off a project and we discuss, well, who do we bring to the project team, from the client side? I often talk about, yeah, a good cross section of business and IT and leadership folks. I still say that. But I also say that we need to bring people of different backgrounds, race, ethnicity, gender, age, ability, and so forth, because ultimately you may not think it has anything to do with the solution we're about to build, but it has everything to do with what we're about to build. We don't want to build a system that only resonates with certain people in your organization, because things will get missed. It will not serve your entire organization, and it will put people who are not represented in a disadvantage. I can't tell you how many times I've built systems where the people who were going to use it the most, the person who might be at the lowest level of the org chart, they're never in the room, because it will just complicate things if they have a say in the design. For me, no more. I'm not doing that anymore. I want to make sure that when we put a team together on the client side, that everyone is there represented in some way, shape, or form. The third thing is to understand your client. When I design solutions with the organizations I work with, I often get asked, well, what gender category should I use? What about race and ethnicity? Should I use Black or a person of color or BIPOC, Latinx? It's so confusing. I say, no, it's not. It's not confusing at all. Just ask. If you are not using the terms that the communities you serve are comfortable with, then you might as well forget trying to engage with them. To me, whether your systems are externally facing or not, as long as you call yourself a community-centric organization, it is essential to have community members weigh in on your system design, especially when it comes to how people identify themselves and how they describe the circumstances they are in. The language and the system that you might be using is often how your staff is going to communicate with the end client, and it should absolutely reflect the empathy and the dignity that your community members deserve. Now, you may have heard of supplier diversity, but I like to talk a little bit about vendor diversity. In any given implementation, I find myself referring different products, referring to different partners, specialists, contractors, sometimes bringing in candidates that the client may need to support their team. And I realize that as a system implementer, I am the client's trusted advisor. I have a lot of influence over the decisions that they make. And I have to ask myself, am I bringing a diverse set of vendors, partners, and candidates to the table? Am I lifting up organizations that the client would otherwise not see? Organizations that are aligned with a nonprofit's equity goals? Or at a minimum, am I presenting them options of partners that are woman-owned, that are Black-owned companies? Or am I just going with the status quo and referring to whoever I did on that last particular project? So these are opportunities to create a more level playing field. It's something I've ignored for years and something I've really made a real focus on as I get into new projects. And then the fifth and the final one that I wanted to bring up was iterative project management. So this moves away from the people side of it and more to the process side of things. One of the reasons that I personally started 1/10 Consulting was because I felt that the typical consulting models really weren't serving nonprofits. The typical nonprofit I work with does not necessarily have an extensive IT team. My primary contact person for a CRM implementation is an operations staff member or a program staff member, and they're only my point of contact because they may have implemented or they may have used Salesforce in their last job. So this is vastly, vastly different than starting a CRM implementation at a bank or at a hospital with a full IT team. So why would I expect that the same consulting models would work in both places? And this is where we, as system implementers, need to be more mindful of this and structure our projects in such a way that is highly iterative, that gives plenty of space in between work cycles to engage folks with the system hands-on in meaningful real-life exercises. And let me tell you, from my perspective, that is not agile and that is not waterfall. It is something different. Call it what you want, but it's something unique that we have to bring to the table. And it's also about the way we train. We need to ensure that training doesn't happen at the end of the project, a few weeks before consultants disappear. But instead, it's the client is being enabled and empowered every step of the way, so that we are 100% confident that with the system, that they are understanding exactly how we map the old way of doing things to the new ways of doing things. And oftentimes in my experience, it's just a matter of inserting the right breaks in the schedule where the client can use the functionality in between sprints, as opposed to being rushed from one sprint to the next and forced to make quick decisions that they don't fully understand. And, having, run a consulting team, I completely understand that inserting breaks in a project is not great. It's not good for resourcing, not good for utilization, not great for the bottom line. But in my opinion, this is what nonprofits need. So it's up for us to find creative ways to solve that. So those, in a nutshell, are some of the 5 ways that I feel that we as system implementers can help create more equitable systems. In summary, if I could put it all together in one, encapsulated a bit here, I would say that we need to look at our implementations through a lens of equity. That is, each meeting, each workshop, each decision point has to be an opportunity to create more equitable systems. Once I started doing this and made a commitment to this practice, I realized how many opportunities were presenting themselves every day. And that makes me happy. It makes me feel like we're doing more than just implementing systems here. And I know that many of you might be thinking, well, yeah, Ruben, these ideas are nice, but my boss would not go for this. Or I need to present a stronger business case for this. And for that, I would again recommend reading that tech equity guide and look at that document and say, hey, boss, this is the standard. This is the standard that the nonprofit tech community has put together as a first draft. So what can we do to pick 2 or 3 items from this particular document and start incorporating it into our work? All right. So I want to pause for a minute here, and I want to get some of your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a second. You might see the infinite slides here, but I do want to just take a quick look at some of the comments here and see if there's any questions that we might have. And feel free to drop any questions that you have before I go into my last set of questions. My last question for you. So I'm just scrolling through the comments. All righty. Okay, I don't see any specific questions here, which is fine. So I do, what I wanted to also do then is bring one more question to you in my poll. And would just like to ask you, what do you take away from this? And this doesn't necessarily need to be something from the slides. It could be just anything that this presentation, this last 20 minutes or so, has made you think about. So if we can just jump right back to our poll everywhere here. I'd love to hear what you took away from today's session or from the last few slides, or what perhaps this made you think of. What's your takeaway? What's your takeaway from what we as system implementers can do to create more equitable systems? And I think I need to activate again. Hold on one moment. Let me refresh this and activate one more time. Okay, should be able to go now. So feel free to drop in. Deactivated again. Not 100% clear to me if this is active or not. So let me try refreshing once more. Oh, I'm looking at some questions here while I'm trying to figure out the poll everywhere. Question on structural issues with networking. Not 100% sure I followed that question there, but I will come back to that one. Please share more about the certification. So the certification that was a diversity and inclusion certificate. By no means does one need to have that sort of certification in order to really have that knowledge. I'd say for me, that Cornell program that I took, it was really just a good opportunity, as I said, to really just kind of put the frameworks together. I've always known how I've felt about these issues, or when you experience, microaggressions, macroaggressions, straight out racism, all in the workplace. But I think what that certification helped me do was really sit down with other people, have very focused discussions with other folks, or at least remotely through Zoom, and be able to start putting those frameworks together. Because I do believe that, by these types of discussions, or by certifications, or by more sort of formal structured discussions like this, we can start understanding what are the underlying and root reasons that we have some of the inequities in our society and in our sector. And I personally believe that once we're able to identify that, then we can see, how do we deconstruct that? How do we dismantle that? So for me, at least, that was a helpful exercise to do so. I see some more questions here. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So what is your recommendation from getting out of the cycle of referring people, vendors who are already trusted networks? Like anything that like anything that of these recommendations that I brought up, it is definitely going to take some work, and it takes some digging to find out, who are some others that you can work with, who might be in other different places, or different represent different parts of the community. I'll give you an example for if this is helpful. I am engaged in some projects on the Salesforce side, and I notice on the Salesforce's App Exchange, which has hundreds of thousands of consultants, there are just lots of different consultants out there, and they're ranked based on their customer service reviews and that kind of thing. But nowhere in this billion-dollar company with their App Exchange does it say anywhere about whether these are Black-owned companies, whether they are women-owned companies, whether it's BIPOC-owned companies. Nothing like that. So I think this is where we need to kind of push the establishment a little bit and say, you need to start having these questions, or this should be one of the criteria that you can search from. And this may not matter to many of the consumers out there, but to other consumers, it's super important. So please, find some ways to have those options available. So I would say any sort of forum or any sort of organization or committee or that you might be a part of that does collect a list of vendors, technology partners, and such. These are opportunities to push a little bit and say, all right, now let's put some criteria in there so people can make some informed decisions if they want to engage. I'll also say if I'm not mistaken, on the N10 discussion forum, I do from time to time see questions of people saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a vendor, for email marketing tool, but my client has a preference to look for a Black-owned company, or to look for a woman-owned company, or someone follows the N10 equity guide, or someone has principles of equity of X." So we are all super lucky to have this forum of N10. So I think using that discussion forum to find out different partners who might represent different aspects of the community, and using that discussion forum is super helpful. I'd say that will be a good place to start in trying to find some of those different vendors, different partners that you can refer to in projects. So great question. I'm going to see if there's anything else. And I would suggest also taking advantage of the people that you're going to meet over the next couple of days. There's lots of folks out there, who have unique services and unique perspectives, and definitely would suggest to take advantage of that. All right. Well, I'm going to conclude where I started with gratitude. I thank you all very much for this opportunity, and for sharing your time with me today. I encourage you to keep in touch with us. Would love to continue this discussion. We're constantly posting articles about the intersection of nonprofit work, technology, race, and equity. So please do follow us on our social media, and would love to continue the dialogue. With that, thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your day.